Ryan, good news, mate. We've had another question from one of our listeners today.
Good.
And the question is around an interesting area, which is conspicuous consumption.
Very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So he's written to us basically saying that he and his team were considering whether their product fell into that sort of arena of conspicuous consumption and what they should be doing about it if it did. But they were debating what actually is conspicuous consumption. I'm going to have a problem with that word. You know that, don't you?
Yeah,
Conspicuous.
I wrote in that question to us, Colin, specifically because I wanted you to have to say conspicuous consumption over and over again. Next
Yes.
week, you can expect a letter from Sally down by the seashore asking how she can sell more seashells.
Or from Peter Piper, who
Or from
picked a
Peter
pickle,
Piper.
pickle pepper.
He's got
Was
a
that
lot
the
of
pickle
questions.
picker that Peter Piper picked?
Yeah. Well, now that I know you can say it, you're not going to get a letter from Peter Piper.
Okay, so we're not going to call it conspicuous consumption anymore. We're just going to call it CC. How about that?
No, we are not. We're going to say that phrase as often as we possibly can. No, this is a good question.
So tell us what, from a scientific perspective, what is it?
Yes.
What is conspicuous consumption?
Yes, and well done. Yeah, so the phrase conspicuous consumption dates back to 1899. This sociologist named Veblen came up with it to describe the way that some people buy stuff. And his point was that, especially at the time that he wrote it, he said not everybody is buying stuff in this way, but there's a group of people, mostly the wealthy, who are buying stuff largely to be so that they can be seen owning it by other people, right? So the consumption itself of these goods and services is very conspicuous. I want to buy it. So this is an interesting idea that Veblen proposed. It's been massively influential, in part because at the time that he wrote this, so remember 1899, they're kind of, marketing didn't exist. There weren't that many branded items. Those that were, many of them tended to be very expensive stuff. So for most of the people living day to day, this didn't affect them, right? In fact, the book that he wrote was a theory of the leisure class. That was the book where he coined the term conspicuous consumption. So he was not talking about everybody, really. He was talking about what's made it interesting, though, is in the time since Veblen, branding has exploded across all price points, price quality tiers. You've got this phenomenon of trading up where sometimes people will scrimp in one part of their lives so that they can splurge in another. I think that it is increasingly common for people, you don't have to be wealthy, for people across income spectrums to consume conspicuously. Now, still probably not everybody, but way more of us are engaged in some form of conspicuous consumption where we are buying and using, at least in part, so that we can be seen buying and using by other people.
Right.
How's that?
Yeah. So if I think I'm actually writing with it, so if I think I treated myself to some Mont Blanc pens.
Okay.
And I sometimes sit here and I write it with my Mont Blanc pen or pencil in this case. And I sit here and I think to myself, a big pen does exactly the same.
Yeah.
But I quite like this pen. So I guess that is conspicuous consumption at the high end, isn't it?
Well, it is now that you've flashed it in front of the camera on our YouTube channel. Yes. And mentioned it by name to our audio listeners. But that's a really good example, right? Because there's nothing about the pen itself that makes it conspicuous, right? You could own a very nice pen and then use it exclusively in your home office to write notes for yourself, and no one would know, right? But a pen can be conspicuous, right? Because we often take them to meetings, we pull it out in front of business clients, other people may see it. And certainly if you ever tell anybody about it, that then makes it conspicuous. So there are certain classes of goods that tend to be more conspicuous by nature. Cars, for example, tend to be more conspicuous. People see you arriving in your car. They see you getting into your car. They might see your keychain, which might have your branded car fob on it. Clothing is very conspicuous. So any clothing brands you have. There's other stuff, though, that's less so. I talk in some of my branding classes about Dove soap. So I'm
Yep.
sure you remember the Dove Real Beauty campaign.
Not really,
Okay,
but
good. Well, let me give you an overview. So, Dove is a very old soap brand, and for a long time, it was positioned with a very functional benefit of moisturizing your skin. So, if you use Dove soap,
right.
it's very good for your skin. And then, gosh, I don't know. At this point, it was maybe 15 years ago. They rebranded around what they called the Real Beauty campaign, and they had some really powerful, moving commercials, kind of talking about the way that a lot of beauty and beauty products are lies. And they had commercials where they showed a picture of a model being taken, and then showed how this very beautiful woman was photoshopped into like superhuman levels of beauty, and then that was what actually went into the magazine, right? Kind of the calling out unrealistic beauty standards. And so it was a very
Right.
interesting move, and Dove got a lot of good press for it, and people were very excited about it. But ultimately, I'm not sure that it was a long-lasting success for Dove, because bar soap is just not a great conspicuous consumption category. It's hard to
Sure.
communicate something to other people with your
Unless you
bar
get a
soap.
load of friends in the shower with you, I
Yeah, no,
suppose.
exactly.
I mean,
Like,
you could say, come into the shower and watch me use this bar of soap.
exactly. And that only works so many times, right? I can only invite my friends to tour my bathroom so I can point out my branded soap so many times before it gets weird. Right?
You could leave the bar of soap on the floor. They could stand on it, slip over, and that would make it conspicuous.
And then in the lawsuit where they sued you, the lawyer would mention Dove many times. I think it would be very successful. I think that would be. So again, like the Real Beauty campaign was very interesting. I think from a kind of a marketing history perspective, I think it was very innovative and groundbreaking. But it is up against this idea that hopefully, so our listeners question. Um, Not everything can be conspicuous consumption. There are certain categories. I might love my water heater that I installed in my house. It's going to be real hard
Yeah,
for me to make that conspicuous. So
yeah,
there's some things that are very conspicuous naturally, other things that are not. Other things like your pen, which may be or may not be, depends on how we use it.
yeah. So I guess by definition, if it's conspicuous, someone has to notice it.
Yeah, yeah, that would be fundamental to the definition of conspicuous. Yes.
Yes. But the reason that I mention that is that I'm convinced that there must be products. So let me give you an example. My sister-in-law spends an awful lot of money on handbags.
Yeah.
Okay. When I haven't got a bloody clue about
Yeah.
what handbags, and she may have a handbag, and I don't know if it's worth $20 or $2,000
Yeah.
because I know nothing about handbags, and that's what I mean by noticing it. Somebody may look at my pen and go, "Colin has a
Excellent.
black pen," but they don't actually know that it's a Mont Blanc pen. They couldn't care less whether it's a Mont Blanc pen or not. So I guess by definition is maybe the I don't know. It's making me think about our favourite subject of segmentation. It's
You
like
are absolutely
who
correct.
are you being conspicuous to, and maybe even why are you being conspicuous? Why do you feel the need to
These
be
are exactly the
conspicuous?
right questions. So
Good.
there's actually research on this that I can share with you.
Okay.
The,
Good.
the first point being, though, that as we always say, it's never one thing. So we're going to be talking about what branded products do for other people, right? We're going to be talking about how you communicate to other people through the things that you buy and use. But that's not the only driver. I'm sure that there are some people who are pen aficionados who will tell you that no, this Mont Blanc pen in fact writes better, right? So they They've got an
Sure.
opinion about the actual performance of it. There are other
Sure.
people who will buy it and it's like, no, when I use this pen, I feel like I've accomplished something. It reminds me of what I've done. So it's purely introspective, right? I feel different. Those
Sure.
are perfectly valid reasons to buy something, right? If we're
Sure.
talking specifically, though, about conspicuous consumption, then the point you made is exactly right. Not all conspicuous consumption is the same. There's this fascinating phenomenon. My colleague at Emory, Morgan Ward, who we've had on the podcast several years ago, she published some really interesting research where they looked at kind of I think they called it the loudness of the brand signal.
Right.
You might see a Gucci handbag where the Gucci logo is like tiny and you can hardly even spot it. And then there's others where the word Gucci is written in like 1,000 point font all over the bag. You can't possibly miss it.
Right.
What they found is that as an item gets more expensive, the branding gets louder and louder. So we get bigger and bigger logos and symbols and
Right.
brand names up to a point. And then as it gets even more expensive, the loudness of that brand signal starts to go back down. So that the
Right.
very most
Interesting.
expensive handbags and sunglasses and things, the branding is very, very discreet. And their
Mm.
explanation for this, and they backed it up with some additional studies, is that just what you were saying, people are communicating to different audiences. So as you're getting an expensive handbag, you might want to communicate even to people like Colin who don't know anything about handbags. If you don't know anything about, neither do I, by the way. But if I saw a handbag that had Dolce and Gabbana written on it,
Sure.
in massive font, even I could
Sure.
understand that signal. But
Sure.
at some point, people who are very much in the know and who have a lot of wealth and want to communicate, they no longer want to communicate to everybody. They now only want to communicate to people who either also have a lot of wealth or who also have a lot of kind of specific knowledge in that category. So other aficionados, for example. And so it
Sure.
changes the audience. There's kind of a segmentation on who you're communicating to.
But so the the interesting bit for me as well then is you're mentioning wealth there, and I know that this is obviously where it started off from, but conspicuous consumption. I said it right. How about that? Um, there are other things that you conspicuously consume, aren't there?
Yes.
So I'm thinking of people who are, you know, environmental things. I don't
Yes.
know, driving a Prius or something like that. I mean, that must be conspicuous consumption as well.
It
So it's not
absolutely
just
is.
about wealth.
Yeah, yeah, and there's research on this too. You're exactly right. Apparently, nobody needed to do any of this research, Colin. They just needed to talk to you and say, "What do you think, Colin?" Because all this research is backing up what you are intuitively noting. When Veblen first started talking about this, it was about wealth, right? So rich
Right.
people are going to communicate to poor people and also to other rich people through what they consume, and that was the way people thought of it for a long time. But you're absolutely right. It is not. It still is a lot about that for in many categories. Like a lot of luxury goods are
Sure.
very much about conspicuous consumption, but it doesn't have to be. It's just about communicating something to other people. And so you're right. So people can communicate their values through what they consume. There's jokes about how vegans will not stop talking about veganism, and some part of that might be construed as conspicuous consumption, right? I'm refusing to eat animal products, and I'm going to do that in a very conspicuous way, in part because those are my values and they're important to me, and I want other people to know that about me. As you mentioned, environmental credibility is another thing that can be signaled conspicuously. Cool can be. So
Right.
some people might wear like a T-shirt from a very popular band, like a Guns N' Roses or a U2. Like everybody would know who that is. But you've also got people who would communicate. Who would wear a shirt from a band that like nobody's ever heard of. But if
Sure.
somebody else has heard of that band, well, now you know that they're in the tribe, right? And so
Yes.
like I'm communicating to just those specific people who are cool enough to know about this brand or about this musician or about this,
Yes.
if I'm carrying around some particular, heady book, and I'm carrying that in a conspicuous way, I might be signaling to just people who are also kind of into that kind of literature.
Yeah, because it was making me think. It was making me think this week because knowing that we were going to talk about this subject, I flew back to the States, to Florida on Monday. Okay, and when I landed in Tampa, um, I was getting my luggage, and someone had a surfboard, clearly a big
Yeah.
surfboard. Okay, first of all, I thought, do they not know there are not many waves on the
So
Gulf Coast?
Tampa, well known for its huge waves.
Yeah. But I also thought, yeah, there's some form of branding on that,
Yeah.
the carry case or whatever. I hadn't got a bloody clue what the branding was. I don't know if that meant it was high end, low end, environmentally friendly. You know, the one of a kind surfboard nobody else has ever got in the world. I haven't got a clue.
No.
So I guess it does go back to that tribe bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, and yet a surfboard is an interesting thing because everybody knows what a surfboard is. We may not know what the brand is, so there might be like multiple
Yeah,
levels there. I can remember in high school there were people who would like always carry a basketball around with them or always carry
sure.
a skateboard around with them, even if they weren't using it. It became though a way of signaling to other people what was important. So this guy's cool. This guy's a surfer. We might not know him. If you were an actual surfer, you might know that this brand that he's wearing or that he's a surfboard is actually a big deal and it shows that he's committed, or that it's kind of a joke and it shows that he's not. But the surfboard itself is another form of conspicuous consumption.
So this is where it made me start thinking, as I was thinking it through, about where's the sort of intersection between this and branding.
Yeah.
So because of exactly what you're just saying, basically, if you think of conspicuous consumption, is that so? Certainly, it could be that I'm consuming a certain brand, but is that more about therefore branding rather than conspicuous consumption, or does that actually go back to answering our listeners' question, which is around is their product or services, is it being consumed conspicuously? So is there much of a difference between the two? They're certainly joined together, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, I think that they're separate ideas. I don't think we could collapse conspicuous consumption into branding as if they're equivalent, but they obviously overlap a great deal. Like where one of the values that you get out of a brand is that it can communicate something to other people about you,
Yes.
right? And that's
Yeah.
part. So you
And that
you
and
love
that's and that just to
Apple.
follow that down the line, that is then you like showing people, i.e., you are conspicuously consuming something because of that being wanting to be in that tribe and everything else,
Exactly.
because of
Yeah.
what it says about you.
Yeah. And it's not, again, it's usually not that alone. So you love Apple products, for example. And part of that
Sure,
is because of the functional qualities of Apple. You trust them. They make, well-designed products, things that are
sure.
easy to use and reliable and all that. I suspect that part of it, though, is also you see yourself as an Apple person, which means that you kind of resonate with what the brand stands
Yeah,
for. You like the
look,
associations.
everybody knows that I'm cool and I'm trendy.
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
knows that. I mean, it's just part of me.
Exactly. This is the last part of why I suspect you like Apple is what it communicates to other people, who might
But it's an
somehow
interesting.
not know that you are cool until they see you using your Apple products.
Well, but the interesting bit there, just to get serious about that for a moment, is it's actually what I would like people to think
Yes.
about me.
Yes.
It's not what actually people do think about,
So
necessarily do think about me.
one of the really really interesting things about Apple, I cannot think of very many brands that have been able to do this. Maybe Nike. It is really hard for a brand to be mainstream and cool at the same time.
Sure,
Usually, as more and more people start to use a brand, then the brand becomes less shiny. It's less cool, and so you're like, and
sure.
I think that Apple, to a remarkable degree, has kind of maintained some of its cool factor, even though people like you and me are using it, right? So
Mm.
typically, if you want to be cool, it has to be like just the cool people are using it, and then you've got like kind of a fringe who are also sort of using it. But that usually degrades the coolness of the brand. And it's a rare exception where that's the case. But Apple, I think, still has some cachet.
So here's an interesting thought: I'm thinking it's coming up to September, and I'm thinking I'm going to get myself a new phone. Okay, why? Because I haven't had one for a couple of years. Now, the for me, is that part of that? Is that sort of conspicuous consumption? So, is part of the reason that I'm buying a new phone is because I want to be seen to have the latest phone and the latest technology?
So, yes. So again, there are lots of reasons why you could, right? There may be some new feature in the new phone that you're like, oh, that would really improve my experience. I definitely want to have that. So all of that aside, one thing that Apple has done very, very cleverly is every new edition of the phone, there's some prominent visual feature that distinguishes it from the old phones, right? So
that's a good
at
point.
some point, there was one camera, and then the new phone had two cameras, and you could see that they were the two cameras on them.
Yeah,
I've been seeing headlines that they are going to, or they've already introduced a yellow iPhone. Have you seen these? Okay.
No, but I think you're raising a really good point.
But
because
like
it
the
also,
colors, for example, there's no reason on earth why Apple should only introduce iPhones that are, white, black, or gray. Like, there's nothing to stop them from allowing people to have colors, and they could do that every year.
Sure.
But if they don't, if it's like, oh, well, now only the newest model has some color options, then that signals if you've got a color one, everybody knows that that's the newest edition. And then they'll stop doing that the next year and do something else. So that for that group of people for which this is important, for which conspicuous consumption is important, and it won't be everybody, but for that group, they're providing that value. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's making me. You're doing well today, mate. You're making me think. What it's making me think is that, again, if you were to take
expose you to ideas when you're in England, we need to keep the ideas in the American soil. So you're only getting the real stuff when you come back to Florida.
Okay, I'll make sure I'm here more.
Yeah.
So it's making me think that the sort of conspicuous consumption is the implementation of a brand. So let me give you an example of that. So we've talked about I may be getting a new phone, and part of that is because I haven't had one for a couple of years, and therefore to people that in the know, to your point, may see that it's a pink one or a black one or a whatever else, and they go, "Oh, Colin's got the latest new phone." Okay. But the opposite applies as well, doesn't it? To the other sort of, let's call it the other end of the market. Okay.
Yeah.
So someone who's got I don't know, Apple 4, I don't know if they still work, but that also says something about them, which is I don't care about all this. I don't care all about this stuff. I don't care about having the latest things, and that could be part of the, or is probably part of the image that person is trying to create. Okay, and not necessarily. I'm not saying everybody does things just to create an image, because clearly they don't. But it feels like this is part of the implementation of the brand, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the way I would encourage people to think about this is dramatically oversimplified, but think about your brand as a pie chart, and maybe we'll give it 3 different slices in there. So one is kind of the functional value of the brand, and one is like the self-communication or the self-perception aspect of the brand, and then one is the conspicuous consumption part of the brand. And the size of those pie pieces will be different depending on the brand. But for many brands, all 3 are there. And so to your point, are you implementing something in your branding that will allow some source of value for all 3 of those parts of the pie? Do you, like Apple, for example, does produce some stuff that performs really, really well, right? And it does have these kind of self-valued aspects of the brand that a lot of people like see themselves as more creative because they're Apple users. And then there's the conspicuous consumption. So like, are you implementing something for all three of those? And since we're talking about conspicuous consumption, for that specifically.
So tell people your thought about social media, because I think that this was something we talked about pre-show, and I think it's really a really interesting insight.
Yeah. So going back to the question that was asked by our listener, like, does conspicuous consumption matter for me? Think about your product category. That'll tell you something. Think about the sources of value for your brand. That'll tell you something else. But especially since I know we've got a lot of customer experience professionals listening right now, experiences are more shareable than they've ever been before, right? So that it is possible to conspicuously consume experiences in a way that has never been true before because of social media. So, going to the dentist was never a conspicuous experience before. You couldn't conspicuously consume your dentistry. You can now, if for some reason you wanted to. You could take pictures of the office and post them, and a selfie with your, dental hygienist as she's cleaning your teeth, and with pictures of your X-ray. So all of these experiences, which used to be private, can now actually be publicly consumed. I think that opens up an entirely new dimension for creating value on conspicuous consumption domains that previously weren't there before.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And the other one I would throw in here is, as I thought about it, was the one of the new phrases that's come up over the last few years has been virtue signaling.
Yes.
Yeah. And conspicuous consumption is also about saying, in a certain area, that I'm virtuous because I'm consuming these things. So it helps me in the signaling to what people are. So,
I made a joke about, your water heater not being a, conspicuous consumption opportunity. But if I bought a super fuel efficient water heater, one that was very environmentally friendly, I could imagine posting about that on social media so that I could signal to other people how important those values were to me. So yeah, I think that's very much tied up in this.
Yes. Makes you think about actually people posting about what they're eating and stuff as well, doesn't it?
Yep. I mean, any meal is now conspicuous consumption potentially.
Yeah. And potentially virtue signaling, depending upon what you're eating as well.
Yep.
Or potentially luxury or whatever else. So,
or signaling that you're just like, you're an interesting person, because I'm a boring person raised in the Midwest, but look at the Thai food that I've created for myself here, right? And signaling how cosmopolitan I am. Yep.
Which goes back to the brand as well, doesn't it?
Yep.
Okay, so let's do our usual bit. So what does this mean? Go back to our listener's question. What does it mean? So let's assume that yes, their product or service is being conspicuously consumed. What does it mean that they should do?
So going back to the question from the listener, I would first try to figure out, is there an opportunity here? And there won't be for all brands, right? It won't for all offerings. For some things, people tend to consume them in private. It's not something they necessarily want to be associated with. I remember hearing an example, which I hope is true. I haven't tracked this down, but there was a medicine for colon health, some kind of supplement that you could take. And they decided it would be a good idea to create an online forum where people who use the supplement, who use this medicine, could get together and like talk about their colon health. And it didn't work because that was a product that nobody wanted to consume conspicuously. Nobody wanted other people to know about their colon problems. Right.
Yeah.
So there's stuff where conspicuous consumption is not going to help you. So first figure that out. Is this actually
flatulence pills?
There you go. Well, that
you
is
don't have to
conspicuous.
You don't, I was going to say, you don't have to conspicuously. You can just smell that they're coming.
That's an attempt to be less conspicuous through your consumption, to reduce that.
Oh dear.
But yeah, so I mean, it may be some, if you're selling office paper, you can make the best office paper in the world. There's a good chance nobody's wanting to consume that conspicuously. On the other hand, you may have opportunities there. So if you do have opportunities there, do what we've been talking about, where you have a strategy around that, right? I mean, Apple introducing a yellow phone when there's nothing to have stopped them from allowing people to pick any color they want to for forever.
Sure.
It is very much this. It's allowing people to signal that they've got the newest thing, and for some people that's going to be important. So provide that source of value for the people who want to consume conspicuously. Give some consideration to which audience people want to communicate with. Are they communicating broadly to everybody, or are they narrow casting where they only want to communicate to certain people about this, and try to build that into it? And then finally, recognize that experiences too can now be conspicuously consumed increasingly. And so if that's an opportunity for you, are you facilitating that? Are you giving lots of like Instagram worthy moments during the experience that you're providing?
Yeah, and building on that, and I think we talked about this a couple of podcasts ago. Are you enabling that? So are you providing free Wi-Fi and various different things like that? And
reminding people to post.
Yeah, and here's a great place to take a picture of what you're consuming from the dentist chair as the dentist is going into your mouth with a drill.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Okay, we hope that's been of use. And just think to yourself now: are you conspicuously consuming something?
And it is making me think that we maybe need to produce bumper stickers for the podcast, Colin. Allow people to conspicuously consume the intuitive customer.
Well, maybe there's even more value with people saying, I definitely don't listen to this podcast.
No. What you got to do is you got to take out your earphones and instead listen to the podcast on your speaker loudly in front of everybody at the grocery store or the gym with you, so that everybody else will know what you're listening to.
Be proud. Okay, everyone. We look forward to talking to you next week. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.